Questions. Everybody seems to have a question that they need answered in life. Hi, my name is Eric. In this next seminar, Dr. Hovind takes a large variety of questions that he's been asked on a regular basis and combines them and gives his best explanation for what's happening. He covers a variety of topics such as the Red Sea crossing, primitive man, what about radiocarbon dating? Hey, are there really contradictions in the Bible? Find out for yourself in this seminar entitled Questions and Answers.
If you've gotten this far, hopefully you've seen the first 6 because we will be covering new information. I taught science 15 years and I cover information on the subject of creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. I take the position that the Bible is literally true, scientifically accurate in all details, and the evolution theory being taught in our schools is the dumbest and most dangerous religion in the history of planet Earth. We're going to be covering a wide variety of questions that I get during my Q&A time. Everywhere I go, I try to ask, teach for an hour or so and then have question-answer time. And I've heard most of the questions that come up in the last 17 years that I've been. I'm live on the internet, drdino.com or truthradio.com, and you can take our college classes and ask questions there. We cover just a whole lot more material. All of the slides that I use in my seminar, and it's close to 7,000 now, are available to download off my website. That indicates there's something in the notes section of the slide. And there's a lot of things I have to skip just for sake of time, but hopefully we can answer some questions for you here. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes, I applied mine heart to know and search and to seek out wisdom and the reason of things. I think it's more effective for God's kingdom if we knew more and could give an answer. That's the goal of all this seminars that we produce, is to equip people that can give an answer to know the truth. 1 Peter chapter 3 says, Sanctify the Lord God in your hearts and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you the reason of the hope that's in you. Are you the only one that believes in creation? Don't all scientists believe in evolution? Absolutely not. I don't know how that question even comes up. Not all worked for years at the Sandia National Laboratories. There's a good article about him on the Answers in Genesis website. They've got a whole list of 108 the books in the library. You can read those if you want to take that. I've looked at the subject. I can't buy it yet. I think they're wrong. I think the sun is in the center. Of humors. If you're sick, you have bad blood. Take out your blood and you get better. That's how George Washington died. They were wrong. And in that case, they were dead wrong. Okay. In John chapter 7, many of the people, therefore, when they heard this, said, Of a truth, this is the prophet. Others said, This is the Christ. In John chapter 7, the people were arguing about, was Jesus really the Christ? And some of them said, wait, Christ doesn't come out of Galilee, and Jesus came from Galilee. So they had the whole wrong problem. They're arguing about the wrong subject. So in John 3:43 it says, So there was a division among the people because of him, and some of them would have taken him to shut him up. They got the wrong impression to start with, and that's what happens. People get the wrong idea. They think creationists like me are doing damage to education system. No, we're the right people. We're trying to fix the problem, okay? We're trying to resolve it. Verse 45 says, Then came the officers to the chief priests and Pharisees, and they said unto him, Why have ye not brought him? Now this is classic. Notice, the chief priests sent their hoodlums to professors in Milwaukee, refused to debate me. 80 professors at Northern Michigan University refused to debate me. I've had close to 4,000 now professors that have refused to debate on the subject. And they don't even come when I speak. They send their students and say, here, ask him this, students to try to trap the creationists. They won't come themselves, okay? And then when that doesn't work, they try to use the law to silence them. Let's just pass a law. And I would encourage college students and professors and anybody, listen to the creation side. Just listen. Really honestly listen and hear it. And listen to the creation side. Understand it. Because when I get done talking, a lot of times, like in the airplane, I sat by somebody who believed in evolution just last week. I said, well, let me just explain the creation side. It took 3 minutes, explained the creation view very simply. And they said, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Well, yeah, just listen, okay, to what they got to say. Okay. They started with the false assumption that Jesus was from Galilee. He wasn't, okay? He was graphic, therefore that proves it's not right. Well, you didn't see many capitalist articles in communist journals 10 years ago either, by the way, you know. It doesn't prove anything's right or wrong. Followed false gods many times in the Old Testament. The majority of the leaders hated Jesus. The majority of the world hates Christians. The majority voted in Bill Clinton twice, for heaven. He would do research on the granites around the world. He discovered that as you looked at granites under a microscope, you find they got little tiny halos in them. Major journals until somebody said, wow, guys, Gentry's work is proving the Big Bang Theory wrong. They took away his funding and shut him off like a spigot. They persecuted somebody just because his work was not supporting the sacred cow, i.e. evolution. Here's a current science journal. See, here's the evidence. He never mentioned God, never mentioned the Bible, never mentioned creation. He just said this textbook's not accurate, and they told him he couldn't do that. You can't inform your students that the book is out of date? That's the kind of persecution Christians wrote for many major journals, National Geographic, Science Digest, American Journal of Physics. He wrote for all kinds of articles for magazines. Ed Eller, or the superintendent, and said he could not introduce creation to his class. Now, there's no law against teaching creation at all. The law says you can teach it, the court says you can teach it, but your boss now says you can't. So he quit his job finally over that. He stood firm and said, look, teacher at San Francisco State University. He wrote this book and says, it's a biology textbook, basically, a science textbook, that says, hey, you know, there must have been some kind of designer. This is so complicated, this is amazing. There must have been a designer. It doesn't try to get him saved or converted to be a bad, hired him. But he was tenured, so he sued them and got his job back, and they put him in as a lab assistant washing test tubes, stuff that, you know, the students do. He had to sue him again to get his real job back. Just because he said, I think there might be a creator to this universe. That's the type of persecution you get. When I spoke in Lubbock, Texas several years ago, they had a professor there named Dr. Dini, D-I-N-I, who teaches biology. He told his students, if you don't believe in evolution, don't come ask me for a recommendation for 2 hours. That's pretty good money, Leah. How'd you like to make $1,000 for 2 hours? I mean, he said, no, he won't do it. This persecution that happens against Christian University for Women. I spoke just north of there a few weeks after this happened. I talked to some of the people involved. This lady was told she had to resign her job because you're going to get an education, I thought. And it used to be that way, but it's just not anymore. It's pretty sad. And this lady said that this professor that wanted to fire her hadn't even heard her speech. But she was, you know, raising doubts about Darwinism. Just go to answersingenesis.org website and type in scientists who believe creation. And it'll bring up all kinds of articles, and you can read about all these scientists down through history who have been evolution theory. Is that why we have computers? Is that why we have, you know, telephones, radios? Is that why we went to the moon? What advancements? Major science, all the whole branches of science in the last 400 years were started by creationists. Now, they weren't all young earth creationists like me, and they certainly weren't all independent, temperamental, fundamental, right-wing, radical Baptists like me, but they were, you know, creationists. Werner von Braun, the head of our space program, was a creationist. A.E. Wilder-Smith, William Ramsey. The Wright brothers, they studied birds. They said, we want to see how the designer, the creator, how God made the birds, and we'll learn how to make. There's a couple good books we have in our library or for sale on our website. In 6 Days is one, and On the Seventh Day. This is 50 scientists who believe in creation. A famous leading philosopher of science. He said, evolution is not a fact. Evolution doesn't even qualify as a theory or hypothesis. When Darwin's book came out, Julian Huxley said, I suppose the reason we leapt at origin of species was the idea of God interfered with our sexual mores. Every week when I go out and speak, somebody will come to me and say, when I was in biology class, I wrote a paper and the teacher gave me an F because it didn't support evolution, or because I dared to go against the evolution of the Constitution. You can get the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence for $1. This little book, Citizens Rule Book, excellent book. Everybody ought to read this one. It's got a great story in here about the jurors. It's amazing the power that jurors have. One juror got law. I don't think it's fair to say you can't spit on the sidewalk. The judge is going to threaten all the jurors and say, now you have to rule according to the law. You got to listen to my... And the rest of the jurors are going to think you're nuts. What do you mean not guilty? You saw the tape. You saw it. Yes, I know. But the law's no good. Jury nullification. Powerful, powerful story here. Anyway, the Constitution does not mention separation of church and state. You should get the Federalist Papers thereof. But that same day, Congress voted to send $25,000 to help a Catholic missionary start a mission to help the Indians in St. Louis. They were not trying to set Constitution about separation of church and state, and it's perfectly fine for Christian teachers to do all kinds of Christian things in their school. My brother taught 34 years. Trouble, see one of those folks. But what happened? Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to some Baptist pastors, and he's the one that mentioned the phrase in the letter, separation of church and state. And now the atheists are using that to say, oh, you can't have Christian things in government. What a dumb idea. And he could say, I've got a constitutional right to keep my money. Yes, you do. But you also have a constitutional right to make a contract. And you made a contract. So the judge is just going to uphold contract law. Okay, a question that I very frequently get asked, I would say every single week I go speak, which is 52 weeks a year now. The earth is only 6,000 years old. How do we see the stars? Yesterday on the radio program, on the website, Dr. Dino, some guy called in and said, now, who said anything about a 6,000-mile radius? He said, well, you're the one that said the universe is only 6,000 years old. Yes, I did. But I did not say all the Genesis 1. And then verse 14, he made the stars also. Evolution says he made the stars evolve first and then the earth. Well, there's certainly a lot of stars out there. Nehemiah chapter 9 says, Thou, even Thou art Lord alone. Thou hast made the heaven of heavens. God is claiming that He made them. So, either He did or He didn't. But what about the stars? How do they fit in? Astronomers can see a here's a star explodes. And they're looking out there with their telescope and say, oh wow, there's a new one. A star exploded. It's called a nova. Or if it's a big one, they call it a supernova. No, why would I do that? It won't go. But stars blow up every 30 years. Well, they've searched the heavens with these telescopes looking for how many supernova rings are there. They call it a dead star. Or they can find less than 300. Now, wait a minute. If there are less than 300 supernova rings, and one happens every 30 years, you can do the math. I mean, that's about 9,000 years. If the universe is billions of us, we would have to have at least one star born every 30 years just to keep the balance. I mean, countries that have a population problem because they're getting less births and deaths, like Germany, more people are dying than being born. Oh, well, eventually that's going to create a problem, okay? Stupid. How a physics textbook can teach this, I don't know. Anybody that knows freshman physics knows when you try to squeeze gases together, pressure builds a solid. It would take such incredible pressure to do that. I was in a debate one time, and this professor, I asked him, I said, how can you get dust to collapse into a solid? Explain that to me. He said, well, we calculated that if 20 stars explode near each other, it'll produce enough pressure to make a brand new star. I said, now that's brilliant. You got to lose 20 to gain 1. I said, you ought to run for Congress. It's never been observed, okay? I was in Alamogordo, New Mexico, and they've got a science center down there, and they showed these pictures of star babies. They said, oh, this is a new star forming. No, sir, it's a bright spot, okay? One guy in Science magazine admitted, the silent embarrassment of modern astrophysics is we do not observe material falling into an embryonic star, which should be happening if the star is truly still forming. And no one has caught a molecular cloud in the... Nobody knows how this happens. So if they tell you new stars are forming, you tell them Kent Hovind said they're confused or they're lying. Because nobody knows how it happens. In front of it is and the star was already there. Maybe it's a star blowing up. Maybe it's another supernova. Because that's what happens when stars... All we do is we see them blow up, which is the opposite of what evolutionists need. Now, the Bible says in Genesis chapter 1, let them be for signs and seasons and for days and years, and He made the stars also. Here God is claiming He made the stars, and it says in Psalm, He counts the number of the stars. Not only how many there are total, but each one has its own number. So God will say, oh, this is star number 42 trillion, above the heavens. I believe when God first made the world, it was very, very different than what we see. Mostly land instead of the huge ocean. The Bible I'm aware of that gets it right in Genesis 1:1, where it says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. All the rest of them say heavens. Then there was water above the firmament. Now some creationists do not believe in the canopy theory. I understand. I've read their stuff. I think they're wrong. I lives. Of course, God doesn't need a place to live. He just is, Psalm 29 says, the voice of the Lord is upon the waters. The Lord is upon many waters. Maybe everything that we see when we step out at night and say, wow, look at all these stars. Maybe the whole thing's a little snow globe on God's dresser. That He picked the Bible may still be water above the heavens. But there's a lot of stars out there. Hubble estimate was 11 trillion stars per person. That is 76 trillion divided by 6 billion people. Every one of you gets 11 trillion stars. Days straight, focusing in on that dot. After 10 days, there were more stars in that dot than they could count. These were brand new stars, never been seen. Would be that it's that way all through space. Truly, the stars cannot be numbered, which is what the Bible says. They cannot be numbered. But how do you tell the distance to the stars, and how can the earth be 6,000 years old and the stars be so far away? Fair question. Stephen Hawking said, stars are so far away, they appear to be just pinpoints of light. We cannot see their size or shape. How This is not it, by the way, spotting scope. But if you get the largest telescope on Earth and look at the closest star, which is Alpha Centauri, 4.5 light years away, to see that. Nobody has ever seen a star as far as any of the features of it. You get the biggest telescope on Earth, it's going to be 1,000 miles in diameter, which compared to star distance is zero. It's nothing. So if I'm looking at a star and somebody over in China is looking at a star, we are 8,000 miles away from each other, straight line through the Earth. That would be nothing. What they've done to enlarge a huge circle, We're going 66,000 miles an hour, and it takes us a year to go around. Great big racetrack. Well, the distance from the Earth to the Sun, the diameter of our orbit going around is 16 light minutes. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a star in January, and then we're going to look at the star in June, and we have now gone halfway around this monster circle. And we're going to get 2 observation points to try to enlarge the base. Has 525,000 minutes in a year. If this picture here showing the little yellow dot the picture. What we're going to do is try to get to show you the math involved here. If I had 2 surveyors setting up with their transits or telescopes, and they are 16 inches away from each other, and they're both looking at a dot 525,000 inches away, which is 8. Point A and point B 16 inches apart, and point C 8 1/3 miles away. It's going to make a real skinny triangle. That is one. Now, and I'm not sure you can tell exactly where you were 6 months ago. I think that would be a little stretch of the breeze. Now let's imagine this. I want you to get 2 guys to set up their surveying transits. They're 16 inches apart, and I'm going to go put a dot 8 1/3 miles away, but they don't know how far away it is. They're both focusing in on the dot, and they see this dot. I think that would be difficult to measure, 1 light year. You'd certainly there'd be some guesswork involved, okay? This building here in Pensacola, Florida, 16 inches apart, and they're both focusing on a dot in Chicago, which is 800 out of parallel. I would say that's impossible. Impossible. To measure 15 billion, no question that's impossible. Trigonometry can measure up to 100 light years. Okay, I doubt it, but I'll give them 100. I'll give them 1,000 if they quit crying, okay? The fact is you can't measure a billion. Simple fact. So here's some things to consider about starlight. It said in 2004 that the new SIM technology they say this accuracy will enable SIM to determine stellar distances to 10% accuracy out to a distance of 482,000 million miles. That's 82,000 light years. And then it says, this is an improvement of several hundred times over, which I would agree. I mean, I would say that's even a stretch, but I'll give them several hundred. They can't measure billions. I don't believe you at all. It might be, but you can't prove that. They're making up a story. With SIM technology, they hope to finally be able to get out to where they can measure most of the way across our galaxy, and we're in it. We can't even measure across our own galaxy. You know. Here's the things to consider concerning starlight. Then we'll take a break. Number 1, we cannot measure these great distances. Now that is science. If you do an experiment, get a result, somebody else follows your data, does the same experiment, gets the same result, that's science. Of the speed of light have been published using 16 different measurement techniques. The speed of light has apparently decreased so rapidly, experimental error 150 years. You notice the decline in the chart. The speed of light's getting slower until about 1960. For the last 40 years, anybody that's measured the speed of light gets the same number, 186,282.4, I think, miles per second, which levels out. But a third reason is 1956 is when they invented the atomic clock. And they started using that as their clock to measure the speed of light. Well, now wait. The atomic clock is based on the wavelength of a cesium-133 atom. So the clock is based on the speed of light. Now, if you have a clock based on the speed of light and you're measuring the speed of light with it, well, duh, you got a rubber ruler problem here. Clear back in '87, they said the speed of light was 10 billion times faster at time zero. Got his book on the table. He says a shocking possibility is the speed of light might change in time during the life of the universe. Could it be the speed of light was faster? Here's an article in the newspaper said speed of light may have changed over history, study says. Winnipeg Free Press, nothing's going to be much more detail in our college class about the speed of light. So don't let somebody tell you the speed of light is a constant. We don't know that. Big article came out in Discover magazine, says, was Einstein wrong about the speed of light back in 2000? They said, yeah, Einstein was wrong. The speed of light is not a constant. There's the book by the Italian scientist, I'm assuming he's Italian. It says, look, the speed of light is not a constant. And there have been many articles published about this. You can read them for yourself. I'll flash through them quickly here and you can get the details. So the third thing to consider, the creation was finished when God made it. Not only can we not measure those distances, not only is the speed of light not necessarily a constant, the creation was done. See, Jesus made wine out of grapes that never existed. Full-grown man, full-grown woman, full-grown garden. They got to have supper like tonight, you know. Better be something hanging on the tree ready to eat. Even if you planted, I don't know any creationist that teaches that. So when they say that, they're setting up a straw man, you know, knocking it down. They're lying, basically. The stars probably are billions of light years away. They probably are. We just can't measure them, that's all. I like this article in the Discover. It said, how do scientists measure the age of stars? They said, well, we can find the absolute ages by comparing a star's color and brightness with those in stellar evolution models. Dumb, okay? Now, I think everybody's asking the totally wrong question. Everybody's saying, how did the light get from the star to the earth? Suppose he made the earth and then he stretched out the stars from here. Adam would see the stars on day 6 and day 7 and day 8. Still have been created in the 6 days, 6,000 years ago. Russell Humphreys has a book which I read, and I just have to say, I didn't understand it. God made things and stretched them out into place. So, if that stretching took place, maybe that explains why we have a red shift. And we'll cover the red shift question in just a minute after the break. Okay, let's go on to the question we often get, well, what about the red shift? Doesn't that prove the universe is expanding? Or doesn't that prove the universe is the same, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet? And you can kind of tell what's burning because different things burn different colors, like copper burns green. And each element produces a distinctive color. And so they can kind of tell what's in the star and how it's burning by what color of light it produces. So you can learn a lot about the star from the light. However, as they look at the spectroscope, the colors it produces, there's little black lines in starlight indicating something's burning, a particular element's burning, but they're shifted toward the red. If you notice the center picture up there, its black lines are shifted over toward that goes by. That's called the Doppler effect. Who cares? Well, this happens, okay, whether the sound is moving past you or you moving past the sound, it doesn't matter. You still get this Doppler is leaving us, it would give us a red shift because it would stretch the light out. That's the theory, okay? What really causes it, I don't think anybody knows for sure. Luminosities, or, as most people believe, or their red shifts do not indicate distance. I don't think anybody knows for sure what's causing the red shift, but you certainly can't tell the distance to a star based on the red shift, and that's exactly what they try to do. They look at stars and say, oh, that one's red shifted more, that must be, 10.5 billion light years away instead of 10.2. Sky and Telescope magazine. Thus, for us, the only conclusion that can be drawn is that at least some quasars are relatively nearby. was found embedded in a nearby spiral galaxy with a far lower redshift. Now, how can one star be inside of another star and some of the material falls into the black hole, causing the emission of huge amounts of energy? There's a big article when they discovered this cosmic discovery. Earth can we have these two objects that are different distances at the same location? Well, it's not a problem if you realize that you can't trust the redshift to measure the distance. 0.4 to 10.6 billion years old. The new work relied on Hubble Space Telescope to obtain distance to faraway galaxies. The team led by Answer. So most of this distance stuff they're doing with stars is based on what they call the Hubble constant. But they don't even know what that is. The Hubble constant is estimated. Well, that's going to radically affect your outcome of your equation. So is the universe 8.4 billion years old, or is it 10.6, or is it, when I debated Hugh Ross at Reasons to Believe, he said it's 17.42 billion years old. The fact is, they don't know. They're making up numbers, purely making them up. The article goes on to say you have to be very careful about trigonometry. You got incredible errors built into that. The numbers are just so big. The distances are so large you can't do it. This was happening. They look at a star and say, wow, we know that one is, 4 billion light years away. And look at that one over there, that one's only half as bright. So it must be, 8 billion light years away. They use the inverse square law. And that's all logical if there's nothing in between absorbing the light or scattering the light. Anyway, the guy admits it's not generally possible to apportion it between the two. There's more about Halton Harp, and we'll get all the technical stuff. But when you talk about the stars, there's a good book here by Brian Young called The Stars, God's Word in the Sky. You can get it from our ministry, $10. Great book on the stars. Christians shouldn't be afraid of astronomy. Now, astrology is different, but not astronomy. God created a horoscope. So get coralridge.org if you want to get the book. It's like $6 or $8. But the Bible does talk about the constellations. It talks about Pleiades and Orion. I don't know, and I don't know anybody who knows for sure, but here's what some Christians think. That when God originally made the world, Adam did not have a Bible. Sphinx was built to tell us how to read the zodiac because it starts with the face of a woman and ends with the body of a lion. So you start reading the zodiac. Instead of starting in January like we do, you start with Virgo the Virgin, and you go through the 12 constellations and end with Leo the Lion. I don't know. I know that today the horoscope's all perverted, and Satan always takes what God does and twists it and perverts it and changes it. But if you want to study that, that's fine. There appears to be something to that, though, that maybe there really is something to this gospel in the stars. And Carl Baugh's got a good theory that each of the constellations is frequencies into audible waves like a crystal radio does. It would actually vibrate, and Adam and Eve would be able to hear the music of the stars mentioned in Job chapter 38. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it sure preaches good that the whole gospel story was being sung to them continually as they traveled around every year. Who knows? Anyway, second question. Is the sun shrinking? There has been some controversy among creationist groups in the last 10 years over this question. The sun is shrinking, there's not much question about that, but does that prove it's not billions of years old? Well, I think so. Well, that means, of course, it used to be bigger. You don't need to be too much of a genius to figure that out. Bulletin of American Astronomical Society ran an article back in '79, which some people have argued about the legitimacy of this, but they said, since 1836, more than 100 different observers at the Royal Greenwich Observatory, that's in England, and the U.S. Naval Observatory have made direct visual measurements that suggest the sun's diameter is shrinking at a rate of 0.1% each century, or about 5 feet an hour. Let's assume that is correct for the moment. If the sun is old, That, of course, would assume several things. Has the rate always been the same? You know, has the rate of burn always been the same, et cetera, et cetera. I know there's a lot of assumptions built in. But I think we could all agree the sun is burning. I think we could all agree it's getting smaller. The concept. The fact is, guys, it's burning. It used to be bigger. This creates a problem for your theory. The bigger problem, though, than just the size of, as an astronomer at University in South Carolina, he's a good friend of mine, been down here to do some taping with us when I debated Hugh Ross. He's got a great, I am sure not a world's expert on carbon dating, but I think I can explain things. I'm a teacher. I can explain it as best I can. That's what a teacher's supposed to do. Take the complex and explain it where the average person can get it. And say, since I operate about 4th grade level, you know, I got to understand it myself first so I can explain it. Let me explain how carbon dating is supposed to work, and then tell you the serious problems with it. Carbon dating was not invented until 1949, in the last 60 years. So when they started telling the kids the Earth is billions of years old, back in 1830, if you kiss it, you'd all say, well, it's a fairy tale. But if I told you, hey kids, the frog can turn to the prince if you wait billions of years, oh, maybe so. Now it becomes believable. No, it's still a fairy tale. It's a stupid idea. But the geologic column is where it all started. We covered that on video 4 and some more on video 6 about the geologic column. The Earth was divided up into layers: Cenozoic, Mesozoic, Paleozoic, Archeozoic. Each layer was assigned a name, an age, and an entity because the geologic column's been taught for 180 years now. So surely it's true. No, just because it's been taught 180 years doesn't mean it's not been erected first. Ever since William Smith at the beginning of the 19th century, fossils have been and still are the best and most accurate method. But here's what happens. Earth's atmosphere is about 100 miles thick. Space shuttle, in order to get free from friction, has to get up. If you go up, look at the atmosphere, it has very distinct layers to it, which is kind of interesting. It has a heat sink where it gets very, very cold, up about 7 or 8 miles up, like 80 or 90 or 100 below zero. But the Earth's atmosphere contains mostly nitrogen, 78% nitrogen, 20% the atmosphere, slaps the nitrogen around and turns it into carbon-14. So it all starts by the sunlight hitting the atmosphere, 14. So it still weighs as much as the nitrogen, but now it's considered a carbon. It's called radioactive, which does not mean it listens to the radio. It's going to fall apart every 5,700 years. Now, it is doing this on a purely random procedure. I mean, you got a pile of molecules and becomes carbon dioxide. And they hook up and they're happily floating around the atmosphere. And the plants are breathing in CO2. By the sun striking the atmosphere, plants breathe it in, animals eat the plants. Probably during your lifetime, you've either eaten plants or you've eaten animals that have eaten plants. How many have ever done that before? Like today for lunch, right? Okay. Everything we do is from one of those two sources. It's plants or it's animals that ate plants. 0.00765%, it is assumed that the plants also have 0.0000765%. Probably a real So probably you have 0.0000765% carbon in you because you've been eating these plants or you've been eating the animals that have eaten the plants. So probably it's all balanced in nature. When the plant or animal dies, it stops eating, stops taking in more C14. Therefore, it's been dead for one half-life, 5,700 years. Because it continues to decay after it died, but now it can't be replaced. So while it was alive, it should have had about 0.0000765%. If it's only got 0.0003825%, it's been dead for one half-life. A great article came out from Institute for Creation Research. They're the ones that did the RATE project, ICR.org. They said, with their short 5,700-year half-life externally, under contract to creationists, they confirmed such observations for coal samples and even for a dozen diamonds. Now think what that means. How is that possible? If all the carbon-14 atoms would have disappeared in, say, 30, 40, 50,000 Not 250,000 years old? Ooh, boy, they don't like that answer. They'll keep searching until they find another answer because they don't like that one for sure. And diamonds, which they say, you know, take a piece of coal, squeeze it, it's got a diamond to give to, what's their name, you know, but olive oil. And so, they've learned today, just in the last 20 years, I guess, how to make diamonds that are just indistinguishable from natural diamonds. High pressure, they've been doing it for years. Take your pet, that's right, burn the body, cremate it, pressure it into a diamond, and you can wear your dog the rest of your life, you know, something, or your ex-wife, you know, or whatever. I don't think I'd want to do that. We were talking about that on the radio yesterday. Anyway, the guy said these diamonds even have carbon-14. It says this cannot be contaminated. Those constitute very strong evidence the Earth is only thousands, not billions of years old. Now, the Rate Project book is difficult reading. Heavy reading. Jonathan, you know, don't go down quite so deep version. This one is excellent by Donald DeYoung, Thousands Not Billions. He kind of summarizes in real English need to be pointed out. They'll say, well, we know carbon decays at a certain rate, and so we know if it's only got half as much, it's half as old. The checkbook, you know, you keep putting it in and it keeps leaking out someplace, right? How many discovered that as you live along? Got the ring, Jonathan? You're discovering now, right? Well, the Earth. So the question would be, how long would it take to reach a stage called equilibrium? Now with a barrel, you can actually do the math and calculate. If I'm going to put in, you know, a certain amount of water per minute and a certain amount per minute leaks out, when will I reach equilibrium? I'm not sure how they did all that. You could probably see some of the rate scientists and figure that out. But then they made two mistakes, in my totally unbiased opinion. 30 to 40% faster than it's decaying. Now think about that. If radiocarbon is still forming faster than it's decaying, that means the Earth is less than 30,000 years old, number one. And number two, you can't carbon date anything. How much carbon-14 was it breathing at that time? Doesn't work. There's a website, www.arky.org. He's got more stuff on the Earth. Counter per minute per gram. If you're only getting 8, you say it's been through 1 half-life, or 4 clicks, or it's been through 2 half-lives, or 3 half-lives, etc. This is called a calibrated at 7 inches tall. I say, well, that won't tell me anything. Now we've got to measure how fast it's burning. We measure the candle for a while, we get an Olympic stopwatch, and we get it down to the nearest 40 bazillionths of a second, okay? And we all agree the candle is burning an inch an hour. Here's our two facts. Figure it out. Unless you make some assumptions. Assumption number one, how tall was the candle? And assumption number two, has it always burned at the same rate? Neither of those can be known. If you find a fossil in the dirt, the amount of carbon, less carbon-14 to begin with, maybe none, but certainly less. And when we dig up the fossil that's been buried for 4,400 years, let's say it started with 4, where today we start with 16. We dig it up 4,400 years after the flood and say, wow, here's a mammoth that got lives, when it's actually only been through 1 half-life. Which is why it never works. When they first invented carbon dating, 1949, Willard Libby, they did some of the ones right. How would you know which one? I see no way to tell. Well, let's see if it's getting better. 14 years later, they tested a living mollusk. They expected, they throw the number out. 1971, freshly killed seal was 1,300 years old when they carbon dated it. The numbers are thrown out. How do they know they're wrong? And also, how would you know the other half is right? Carl Swisher at Berkeley University He used the most advanced techniques to date human fossils. It says last spring he was reevaluating science. So when they publish an article in the paper and say, we found a dinosaur bone or a mammoth bone, and it was, 17,221 years old in 6 months and 3 days. Right, come on. You don't know that. They're making up this stuff, just absolutely making it up. Professor Rainer Prach, they tested it at Oxford and said, this is an old man that died in 1750. He's 250 years old. The professor had been lying about this stuff for decades. Last 2 years, an absolute date was obtained for the Gandong beds above the Trinil beds. That's in Indonesia. It has the interesting value of 300,000 years plus or minus 4. See that on the map there, on the chart there? And said it was 17,210 years plus or minus 500. Very same sample. Test it again. So is it 17,000 or 24,000? Sample number 299. He dug down in this well and he found layers of burned wood, which is good to carbon date because obviously it had carbon in it. And he put them in a baggie, sample number A, from such and such a layer. How many feet down? He labeled it A. Dug down 10 more feet, hit another layer of burned wood. A city had been destroyed. Is, I forget, 3,000 years old, and this one's 4,000 years old. He waited 6 months, switched the labels, took them back in, same laboratory, said, I want you to carbon date these samples. Now, sample B, the lower one, is in the top bag. So just switch the label. Helium in the atmosphere is only enough to account for a few thousand or few million years, not billions of years. There's a book called The Mythology of Modern Dating Methods by Isaac, working on dating the moon rocks. They brought back moon rocks, gave them to his laboratory, and said, how old is the moon rock? He took specimens ranging from 2.5 billion to 4.6 billion. That's a 500% error, or 100% error. I talked to him back in '99. He worked on lunar samples, including the Genesis rock. He told me they found ages from 10,000 years to several billion in the same rock. His web of contention has a great chapter at the end called The Dating Game, showing how that they will just change the dates whenever necessary. If it doesn't fit the theory, let's test it again until it fits the theory. See, the theory is important. The facts are not. Evolution, as I've said many times, is a carefully protected state religion. And that's all it is. What about potassium-argon dating? Does that work? Actually, the dating methods are based on the decay of an element. Uranium decays to lead. Potassium decays to argon. Well, interpretation of potassium-argon age, it's common to discard ages which are substantially too high or too low. Number's too high or too low or doesn't match the geologic column, it gets thrown out. Well, then why are you wasting your time and money testing it? You already know how old you'd like it to be. Give it a number. Pick a number. It's dumb. The KBS tuff, a tuff is a layer of ash or lava or with potassium-argon dating, because here's the theory. When a volcano erupts, the rocks and stuff coming out is really hot, and any gases in it should be able to escape. And so the theory says this new layer should have been, the clock is now reset. It is 0 years old. Even though potassium-argon date this lava or ash or any volcanic material. Well, they had been dating this layer of ash named after K. Brenzenmeyer, the KBS tuff. And he finds a perfectly normal human skull. Everybody panicked and said, wow, how can you have that's not possible. And so they looked for things. Was this a burial? Did somebody dig through the rock and bury this person down here? The person was buried under this ash layer. They took 10 more samples of the KBS tuff and dated them again. Keep in mind that already dated down, but they're still getting a 500% error from 0.5 to 2.6. This is not an exact science. See, back the moon, they brought back moon rocks and said, oh wow, they're 3.5 billion years old. That was the official age, 3.5 billion. Today they tell, and by the way, they did it with potassium argon dating. You can see the article here from the newspaper. Today they tell the kids it's 4.6 billion years old. Well then why are you wasting anybody's time? Why? It's not science. The original content cannot possibly be known. You can't know there's been no contamination. You can't know that the decay rates always remain the same. You can't know those things, okay? I'll give you a couple examples. Lava coming out of the volcano. Grab a sample. How old is it? Well, they tested it 5 different ways and got 5 different numbers. All the way from 350, we know it doesn't work when you know the age, but when you don't know the age, well then they say it works. So it just doesn't work. And I'm tired of them using our tax dollars to call that science. Bones have been found. There's a great book out called The Great Alaskan Dinosaur Adventure about some guys that went up to northern Alaska and there's been a missionary for years in Africa, in Alaska. I was just up there a few months ago with him. He said he was there. He could fly his plane right to the spot, been preserved to such an extent that cell characteristics could be compared to cells of chicken bone. Anybody who teaches dinosaurs died millions of years ago has not studied bones before that are not fossilized. He's dug up dinosaurs all over the world. But in the summer of 2005, they found dinosaur tissue inside. Already committed to that. And to say maybe they're only 6,000 years old or 4,400 years old from the flood would absolutely be anathema to them. They'll never consider that. So now, animals that live in the water, okay? Very few mammal fossils are found and very few, human fossils are found. Marvin Lubenow, in his book Bones of Contention, it's the best one I'm aware of on the topic. He's a creationist, but he spent years and years and years, like 25 years, studying all clams, we find billions of those, or fish, we find billions of those. Why only 4,000? Well, there's a couple of things to consider. Why so few human? They say the average Neanderthal could pick up a football player and fling him over the goalpost. They were just incredible condition. The muscular structure must have been great as fossils. Well, the purpose of the flood, according to Genesis, was to destroy man off the earth. That's why God did the flood. The Bible says there were giants in the earth in those days, and there were mighty men of old. So, I don't know for sure what that means, but I suspect that might mean the people were actually bigger before the flood came. We've covered on video 2 about some of the giant fossil skeletons that have been found. People 9 feet tall, 10 feet tall, 12 feet tall, like that. Secondly, people are smarter than animals. Well, some people. And they would tend to avoid drowning until the last possible minute. Whereas animals would get surprised and covered up and buried, the humans would figure out some way to avoid this. Plus, it probably took about 6 months to kill everybody. The flood covered the world, but it doesn't mean it covered the whole world instantly. It rained during the flood. We covered on video 6. So if the earth was totally different configurations, unrecognizable by today's globe, and people and animals would run to the newly exposed island. Here's high ground, get over there. So we'd find footprints in these mud layers that next tide. It is highly probable that during this flood, during these first few months of the flood, you would get thousands of layers deposited for mold. That calls in once in a while, to our radio program, evolutionist. He says, well, we find layers of rock and footprints between the layers. He said that. So yes, it's possible to get footprints, and especially if you look at nearly all the footprints are run in the same direction. What would that mean? Today they're kind of locked into position as most of the water is gone that was underneath, that was lubricating this movement. So they could run to high ground, and then, of course, a couple days later, toward the end of the flood, or toward the middle of the flood, I guess, and not be fossilized at all. Thirdly, if humans were bigger, they would not be recognized as human. I mean, if you find a 5-foot thigh bone, you're not going to recognize it as a human. You're going to say, oh, it must be from a, a dinosaur cave bear. 4,000 have been found. Who's counting all these? Marvin Lubenow says that's what he can find in the published record. But how many things have been found that are human, fossilized, in certain layers, but it doesn't match the established scientific paradigm of the day, and so they rock strata anywhere in the world. So that proves humans and chickens did not live at the same time. No. You know that's not good logic, okay? We don't have to find the bones together to prove they lived together. We don't have to find the footprints together to prove anything either. No human and chicken foot buried deep enough, or they haven't been found yet. All kinds of reasons for that. I was in a debate with a former preacher turned atheist one time, the debate over Noah's Ark. One of his arguments was that Noah could not have built the ark like the Bible says, because the Bible says Noah covered the ark with pitch. And he said, Hovind, don't you know pitch is made from oil, and oil is a post-flood product, according to your theory. The flood buried this world. All these animals got buried and squished and turned to oil. So if oil came as a result of the flood, then how could Noah have pitch to cover the ark? Well, that's based on a common misunderstanding. In Genesis 6, it says Noah covered the ark with pitch, within and without. Make it with pitch. Exodus 2. Moses was put in a little basket covered with pitch. So what is pitch? The Bible says in Isaiah chapter 34, the streams thereof shall be turned to pitch, the dust to brimstone, and the land shall become burning pitch. It shall not be quenched. The smoke thereof shall go up forever. Pitch, according to the dictionary, the resin of pine or turpentine. And there were giant factories all over America, that or not. This is a piece of slate, or shale, I mean. There are probably 60 layers to it, real thin layers, and you can see oil oozing out the side. But right there on the surface is an exact, it's a fish. It's true that animals under There's no question that at least some of the oil in the ground comes from organisms, living organisms, fish, people, whatever, that are squeezed. But that doesn't mean Noah had to have this kind of oil to waterproof the ark. Right? This is on our Creation Evidence Museum. If you want to come down to Dinosaur Adventureland, you can take a look at that. Next question. I often get asked the question, is modern man smart and ancient man stupid? Was he stupid or was ancient man really smart? There's a good book called The Puzzle of Ancient Man by Don Chittick. After the flood came, the people lived to be 900 years old. Adam came pre-programmed straight from the hand of God. He could walking and talking with God. He just knew a lot of stuff that God told him. God would say, Adam, you see this tree right here? Watch this. You pull off the bark, scrape the inside, and chew on that. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's got vitamins. You need that, Adam. Probably a lot of the ancient medicines, that cultures have are remnants of things left over from knowledge passed. Just go sleep on the grass. Suppose you lived in a world where none of the animals would harm you. All the animals were friendly. Everything's vegetarian, Genesis 1:29. Again, you don't need a house. And why don't we find their cars? Well, man, if you're 9 or 10 or 12 feet tall and can great-great-great-great-great-grandchild. So it'd just be a real different world back then. So a lot of this knowledge, I think, went to the grave. But would arise very quickly. If you got a bunch of smart people, Noah's sons, having, 15, 20 kids, have to make stone tools at first, until they can dig a hole to find the iron to melt it down to make the steel tools. They would know how to do it. It's kind of a Gilligan's Island situation. But within 50 years, you could build a civilization. You look at Robinson Crusoe, lands on an island. Say after they all are the Chinese, they just arose out of nowhere. Poof, there's a civilization. There's no evidence of this stuff they teach in school of them going from hunters and gatherers There's the beginning of the Egyptian civilization, the beginning of the Chinese civilization, just like they moved in and built it in less than 100 years. For instance, is in the Smithsonian, I believe. Right, yeah, in Smithsonian. It was found in a grave in Colombia. It's about 1,000 years old. But it's an airplane, quite obviously, with all the features of an airplane. But it can't be an airplane, according to the evolutionist, so therefore they have it labelized in the Smithsonian. Ancient man knew about airplanes because that would go against the theory. The theory says modern man is smart, ancient man was stupid, he was, Evidence shows the opposite of that. Here's an airplane, again, found in an Egyptian tomb this time, 2,100 years old, pre-Christ. A lump of coal. This is a replica. You can get a replica from Carl Baugh. They're breaking open a lump of coal and there's an iron pot inside. They examine the coal that comes out and it's molded right to the pot on both sides. I mean, the coal formed around the iron pot. What would you conclude? That a coal miner dropped it? No, because then the coal won't be conformed to the pot. There's more in the Puzzle of Ancient Man about that topic if you want to read more, but there's one of the stones down in Peru weighs 20. Can lift 3,000 tons. I think they just built one in Japan, if I recall, for unloading ships. I just heard about it in 2003 or 4, that can lift 6,000 tons. There's something like that. That may be the new, somebody's going to say, oh, Hovind, you're wrong, it's more, 3,000 is wrong, you're lying. I'm not lying, I just don't know. I think it's 6,000 tons now, okay? But still, you've got stones up here that weigh 20,000 tons. How did they move that? The Bible says Tubal-Cain was an artificer in brass and iron. That's Adam's grandson. They were already working with brass and iron. This little zinc and silver vessel was found inside rock, supposed to be 600 million years old. Well, I disagree with the 600 million year part, but they knew analog computers in 100 BC. It's called the Antikythera device, Antikythera mechanism. The History Channel in March of 2005 was amazing. It had a whole hour-long message about this Antikythera device. And they looked at the hammer and said, man, it was in solid rock. I said, what on earth? How can a hammer be in rock? And the rock was supposed to be 400 million years old. Sulfur. And then they said, you know, we don't think you can get those elements to combine unless you do it under a much stronger magnetic field. They are using electricity to mummify the snake or do something, or they're using electric eels to produce the electricity. I don't know which way the electricity is going, or even if it's electricity. They're doing, open heart surgery. Here's a guy with an artificial limb attached, so they knew about that. That would have been, 2,000 years ago. This little machine, this little cat was found on wheels to move around, a little kid's toy apparently, in some of the Inca Indian tombs. They certainly were smart as far as biology goes. This little spider is one of the, little nothing, it's 150 feet tall. It's one of the Nazca line images. We cover some of that on, and it exchanges DNA off the tip of that leg. And they knew that. So they were not ancient, not stupid. They were ancient, but they were not stupid. This Cambrian material, 2.8 billion years old. Well, of course, I disagree with the 2.8 billion years. It's a human artifact, quite obviously, found in rock, supposed to be 2.8 billion years old. But see, rather than question, maybe it's not 2 billion years old, guys like Michael 0.8 billion years ago. Rather than question, hey, wait, maybe the whole geologic column is wrong, they just, I don't know why, they're not allowed to question that. His book's called The Hidden History of the Human Race. It's in our library if you want to read that. Here's a mortar and pestle. To grind wheat or grind flour with, 1 to 1.618. How do they know about that? A lot of these are found in Russia. Pavel, if you get over there, bring me some of these. I want some of these for the museum. These little amazing little spirals. There's all kinds of stuff on the internet about that if you want to read it. Well, what about the pyramid? Who built the Great Pyramid? If we're thinking ancient man is, dumb, how did they build the big pyramid? There are 66 copies. The original pyramid is often called the Great Pyramid. It is by far the largest of the pyramids, and it's very dealing on earth by far, has no inscriptions. Who built it? Why was it built? Well, there are 4 theories about the Great Pyramid. Theory says it was built by godly people before the flood. Second theory says it's built by heathen before the flood. It's just a heathen structure, some kind of temple worship or something. The third theory says it's built by godly people after the flood. And the fourth one says it's built by heathen after the flood. Probably it was not built during the flood. I think we could probably all agree on that, okay? Not a good time to build a pyramid. I kind of lean toward number 1, but I wouldn't prove that. I couldn't prove it and wouldn't. One of the theories on all this is, of course, Adam did not have a Bible. So God gave him the gospel story in the stars. This is what many people think, and I kind of lean that way, but though I'm willing to discuss it. Noah did not have a Bible. Compacted, super frozen, like we talked about on video 2. That canopy, before the flood, would have actually made it easier to see the stars, and they could actually hear the music of the stars. The zodiac, that's one of the theories. But Noah didn't have a Bible. He had a couple chapters, because Adam actually wrote part of Genesis. Okay, we cover that in the teledose to that, and go from there. If there isn't, it's not a big deal. I won't lose any sleep over it. But the Great Pyramid is an amazing structure. By far the largest built, a pillar at the border thereof. And it shall be for a sign and a witness. There are quite a few folks who think that that pyramid sat there for thousands of years and nobody could find their way in. Finally, in 800 AD, some Arabs got a hammer and chisel and just started pounding a hole, chiseled their way into the pyramid. They chiseled and chiseled for months. And they said, oh, it came from over that way. Let's chisel there. They chiseled over and they hit one of the passages in the middle and then had to work their way backwards to find the door. Had they known where it was, they could have walked up and just pushed it right open. But nobody could find this door for entrance in. It immediately takes you on the broad road down to the pit, letter C. Or you can take a choice to make a turn and go up the narrow way that leads to the king's chamber. Now that'll preach. It sounds like there's a little gospel in there somewhere, right? If you get to the king's chamber, you find yourself a little bigger than our inch, the pyramid inch. They say each one marks a year, and they say on this grand gallery that it's got marked off where World War I is, year Jubilee. The 50th row of stones is where the king's chamber is. And those who teach that the pyramid has Christian symbolism, of course, will jump on this type of thing. Revelation chapter 7, 144,000. Bible talks about the whole body fitly joined together. And they'll say, see, this is evidence that has some Christian symbolism. Maybe it does, I don't know. Ephesians chapter 4, the whole body fitly joined together. Matthew 21 talks about the stone that the builders rejected. That the builders rejected. Luke 20, the stone that the builders rejected, the same has become the head of the corner. This is obviously referring to Jesus Christ. In Daniel, tells us Revelation 21 talks about the New Jerusalem coming down from God out of heaven. There are those who teach that the New Jerusalem, the city, and the Bible tells us the great city, the holy Jerusalem descending out of heaven, will be clear as crystal, 4 square, and 12,000 furlongs. That's 1,379 miles. So there's going to be a city in Revelation 21 that is 1,300 or 1,400 miles. But maybe it's a pyramid, because that's a structure that could also have those dimensions, and it would lie 4 square. And if it's a pyramid, pyramids only have 1. And if the whole thing's clear as crystal, then the light just kind of translucent. The light goes right through. So he is the light thereof. The Masonic Lodge symbol, which has 13 rows of stones representing the 13 degrees in the blue lodge. The chief cornerstone is not yet in place, and many people say this represents Lucifer, and he's going to come down and establish his kingdom. when actually, God's going to establish His kingdom toward the end. But which one's right? I don't know. I kind of lead toward number one, but I wouldn't be dogmatic. The Bible isn't clear. Next question. The textbooks often teach the earth was a hot, molten mass. This earth science book says, as the earth formed, it was hot, and there were large pools of bubbling lava. Well, now the Bible says, in Genesis chapter 1, that the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So, was the earth a hot, molten mass, and it slowly cooled down over billions of years, or was it created underwater, which means, of course, it has to be less than 212 degrees. It's not a hot, molten mass. Somebody's wrong. Either the Bible is wrong, or the textbooks are wrong. Gentry, called Creation's Tiny Mystery. He spent years studying radiopolonium halos, which are little tiny rings. They are only visible with a microscope, and they're found in granites. Every type of granite all over the world contains these little radiopolonium halos. Decays, it's radioactive, it's dropping to another level. It sends off little fragments, kind of like a hand grenade. The hot molten rock, it would decay, the polonium would decay, poof, make its little halo, and then the rock is liquid, so it would disappear, it would flow away. Just like the fireworks from the 4th of July don't stay there in the sky all year. It goes up, poof, makes a little ring, and then falls down. But if you could explode a hand grenade in a giant block of Jell-O, the fragments would go out and stick and be preserved. The only way you could preserve... Robert Gentry was writing all kinds of articles about this radiopolonium halo, saying, look, this indicates the earth was never hot molten rock. And Grant.com and get much more of the technical information on this. So I think the evidence would point to the fact the earth was never hot molten rock. Then, Lords, God owns the world. Psalmist said, Psalm 8, when I consider the heavens, God made the heavens, and He made man to have, allowed to have private property. Well, if you read through the Bible in Leviticus 25, talks about in the 50th year they have the year of Jubilee. You proclaim liberty throughout the land, and everybody returns to his possession. There's a good link here between liberty and having your own possessions. See, if private property is essential to liberty. And Peter Burrell said, we reject the idea of private property. Kids in school today are having pledges like this. Talk about stupid. This kind of stuff's on the walls of many public schools. I pledge allegiance to the earth, which I do love and depend on, and to all life on land, air, and sea, which is as much a part of earth as me. This one says, I pledge allegiance to the world. Destroy the mean old capitalists, that are destroying the world, and save the planet, Captain Planet. There's all kinds of cartoons designed to get the kids thinking. The real purpose of this environmental movement and the big scare about global warming is not to save the earth. The purpose is to establish communist plank number 1, abolish private property. They want you to have to get a permit to cut down a tree on your own property. One guy in California had this tree was and the tree was growing and was caving in the front porch. So he went to get a permit to cut down the tree. And they said, you can't cut down the tree because, the trees are protected. Talk about stupid. Why go ask for a permit at all? That's what starts the problem. But see, once people sign a contract to become a servant of whoever, now you're under contractual law. If you sign a contract to become 501c3, well, then you better do everything they tell you to do, okay? So don't sign the contract. Don't get yourself tangled up in those things. And that gets Marilyn Quayle, Dan Quayle's wife, the former vice president, wrote the foreword to it. What is the real evidence about global warming? And you can take a look through that if you look 10 times more than it should, and probably still won't be right. I do believe in global warming, though. The Bible says in Revelation 16, the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and the power was given to him to scorch men with fire. There's going to be global warming. Hasn't happened yet. Coming soon to a city near you.